today's session. Thanks for your patience, everyone. In case my Wi-Fi goes out, I'm going to trust Judie and our program intern, Linda, to keep going. I'm going to quickly just share a little bit of information about the Staten Island Not-for-Profit Association. I am Sharmila Rao Tucker, and I am the executive director. And we are very excited to have Judie Eisenberg here with us today from, well, she is the Proposal Pro. And we have a lot of people that have registered. We are recording today, so in case you know those who are not able to attend, we will share the recording thereafter. A few logistics and housekeeping items. As Linda noted, please drop your name and organization in the chat box. We know this is a busy time, so even though this says remove distractions, please know we don't expect you to not respond to phone calls and emails. We know that this is a busy time. We're with each other for about 75 minutes or so feel free to get a beverage, grab some note-taking gear. I can assure you that Judie is going to share lots of tips and tricks, and some of the questions that you answered as well were very enlightening. So we hope for this to be an exchange and a learning environment where we hope to also hear your voices. We are trying some new tools and formats today, so we appreciate your patience. In case any of you have to drop off earlier, please don't forget to check out our Staten Island Stay Strong, Stay Safe campaign. The link is on the screen here, but also Linda will drop it in the chat box. It's our latest initiative and effort to bring awareness of safety and staying well through COVID-19 throughout Staten Island, our little small but mighty borough. There's a toolkit with lots of resources for social media, email campaigns, and other outreach and education your organizations may be doing. So please join us in that effort. Just around practicing accessibility and community agreements. Sometimes during these sessions and workshops, we have more extensive community agreements, but we've just shared a few here. When you do speak, if you wouldn't mind sharing your name and organization. If you're sharing any graphics, describe, if you don't mind, what's on the screen. We're not doing breakouts today, but in general, one person, one mic. We'd like to make sure we respect all views and experiences in this space. Again, we're not doing breakouts necessarily, but move up, move back. We want to encourage people to know when to speak, when to listen, and when to give others a chance. And of course, we are all, well, learning today, and some of us will be learning new terminology, new language. Feel free to stop us. This is an open forum. I know the chat box is there, but if you'd like to raise your hand, you can use that feature. And also, speak up if we're using language or lingo that is unfamiliar to you. For example, on this slide here today, there is a graphic of 3 different people, and they're all faceless. This is just a graphic that happens to be on there with a person with pink hair, an African-American person, and then another a person that appears to be male. And above them, it says respect, I statements, one voice, all ears, and confidentiality. So again, not necessarily all for this space, but we do like to practice some of these best accessibility and community agreement notions and perspectives. By now, we've been doing this for a year. You should all be familiar with Zoom, but just in case there's anyone new on here, at the bottom of your screen, please keep yourself on mute. We are recording, as I said, so if you would like to not be on camera, you can stop your video. You can see who else is participating and chat with them directly by clicking on participants or the chat box. And of course, you all are not sharing your screen today, but we do have other ways to be in partnership and community with each other if we meet again. We are using a wonderful tool called Otter AI to provide captions today. At the bottom of your screen, you can access captions by selecting that tab, and you can also view the captions in different formats. You can also click on the on the upper left, the live tab that says view transcript, and it'll open in a separate browser. This should be familiar, but again, if you want to chat with us or others in the conversation today, if you'd like to raise your hand, you can do that all through the tabs on the bottom of your window. So Judie has an excellent slide presentation. And so because there are going to be a lot of us on this Zoom, if you would like to focus on her and her content, you can, from the middle of your screen, select a view side by side, and from the upper right as well, choose speaker so that you can see Judie and her slide. And you can test it now. You're also able to adjust how much of the slide you see. So if it's appearing small, make sure to use the middle tab and the upper right tab to adjust your view. So a little bit about who we are. I know we have some new people on the line today. We're excited to have you here. The Staten Island Not-for-Profit Association is a membership organization that was founded in 2005 to help build the capacity, providing education, tools, networking, and resources for the borough, Staten Island, not-for-profit sector, organizations, and leaders. We provide a single voice, or try to, for nonprofits by advocating for their needs and sort of voice beyond the borough as well. Currently, we have over 100 nonprofits ranging in size, budget, and mission, and focus area. One of the main coalitions that we house, and I know this is a lot of text, but in brief, is the Staten Island Community Organizations Active in Disaster. For those of you familiar with our work, you know over the last year, this has been the lens with which much of our work through the association has been done, and that's because we're in a crisis or disaster, the COVID-19 pandemic. This coalition was specifically founded to help organizations, nonprofits, and healthcare and social service providers prepare for and respond for disasters. It was founded after the Superstorm Sandy experience that this borough and so much of New York experienced. And what we learned in the last year is that aside from education and situational awareness, the COAD can really be active in the disaster, in response, recovery, and helping rebuild and provide resiliency for our nonprofits and our leaders. So we have been active in not only providing resources and guidance on mandates, but actually helping organizations and our communities access things like PPE and supplies, working on staffing and space for back in the heat or the major sort of pandemic was helping to create space in our healthcare organizations and things like ventilators, and now we're working on vaccine education and outreach. And the campaign that I mentioned earlier on is one of the main ways that we've been doing that. So with that, I am going to hand this over to our lovely presenter today, Judie Eisenberg. Her bio was presented in a lot of our materials, so I'm not going to take too much more time. I'd like to let her share her screen, and when she directs me, we will be doing a couple of polls as well, so stay tuned for that. Thank you all for being here, and thank you, Judie, for joining us.
Hi guys, I am really happy to be here. I'm a little slow on the sharing apparently, but I did it. Hi, quick accessibility check. I am a white woman with blonde hair wearing black clothing. I am in front of a screen which is the campus of Bronx Community College, which is a nationally historic landmarked college campus built by architect Stanford White for what was then the Uptown campus of NYU. Welcome to my pandemic project. So I really appreciate your being here because what I've done during this pandemic is sat down and figured out what I learned in 25 years, first as a consultant and now working for Bronx Community College in my own company originally called Proposal Pro. And it occurred to me that over time, I had started my business helping minority businesses to get federal contracts. I didn't come into the nonprofit world or grants until 2001 when I was asked by a friend, because at that time people had decided that nonprofits should act more like businesses. And the techniques that I had learned in business became very applicable to grants. In my years as a consultant, I've won over $500 million in awards through 50 agencies at all levels of government, state, local, and federal, now specializing in federal grants and contract. And during the pandemic, I started to write a book on what it is that I know and that I can share to help other people be successful in federal grants. As it turns out, you can't get a book contract with 100 Twitter followers. So you're going to get a resource sheet with me with contacts, including my social media. I'm going to ask you to please follow me, and I appreciate your being here today. I am a big fan of federal grants. A lot of people who are not in federal grants really look at this like an overwhelming prospect. But Sharmila, maybe we should find out who we're speaking to today. Would you like to start the polls? I think you're muted. So I would love to know whether you or your organization have been awarded a federal grant and what level of experience we're dealing with in the audience today. All right, 58 to 43%. Good, good, good.
Okay. I think we have a few more coming in. We'll close it in just a few seconds here. Okay. Do you see the results?
Yeah, we do. 58 to 42. Lots of experience, but a good number of people who are new to the process. Good to know. Do you have another one while we're at it? We have 3, right?
Yes, we do. We're going to go, whoops. Hold on just one second. This is the technical piece that I was mentioning. Okay. The second question is, what is your primary job title or role in the organization or in the work that you're doing? And if it's not reflected here, feel free to drop it in the chat, which you can do anonymously as well if you'd like.
So we have a nice diverse crowd here today too. That's excellent.
We'll give it 2 more seconds here. Okay. And you can see, you see that on the screen?
Yeah, we got 23% CEOs, 3% CFOs, 3% COOs, 14% fundraising, program staff 11. We have grant writers at 11 and consultants at, looks like 20. Excellent. One more do we have?
Yes, and the last question, what sector or program area does your work organization focus on? Again, I think you should be able to select multiple here. And if you don't see a category listed, please feel free to drop it in the chat if you'd like.
I see pulling 2 up. Okay, great. So I love this, very diverse.
Great, thank you for dropping in the chat as well.
Linda speaking, so Addie Short just said economic development in the chat.
Excellent.
Linda again, Lucas added homeless shelter.
Okay.
Perfect.
Great. And so here are the results, if people wanted to take a look.
That's awesome. All right,
Excellent.
great.
Okay. That was our last poll.
Great. Thank you, Sharmila. Can you take it down from your end?
You still see it?
I still see it.
Does anyone else still see it? I took it down. That's odd. Maybe close it on your screen.
I don't see it.
I'm
That's
done.
Christine.
I'm done. Okay. So anyway, thank you for that. So that you know who I'm speaking to. I'm glad that you have so much diverse experience, and I certainly hope that you'll feel free to jump in and share your experiences. I've created this so that at the end of each of the sections, there'll be an opportunity for you to ask questions. We've got Sharmila and Linda monitoring the chat if you want to drop your questions in there. Or when we come up to a question screen, also feel free to ask. So why do I love federal grants? Because I see time and time again that this is the money that really sustains, scales, and transforms organizations and amplifies impact. The easy answer is that these are large dollar multi-year grants, 1 to 5 years, 200,000, 500,000, $1 million, $5 million, money you can get excited about. The other thing is that when other funding opportunities dry up, feds can print money. They often go in, super helpful. But beyond the money itself, there are other things that make federal grants very attractive to organizations, one of which is networks and resources that tend to crop up around specific grant opportunities that can really provide professional development and tools and training and processes that are really helpful for your organization. Evaluations on the national level, so expensive to have a single organization hire its own evaluation. But if you are a grant awardee, often you become part of a national evaluation that provides you with the information you need to speak to other funders. It also gives you a lot of credibility on a national stage. The ability to say we won an award for XYZ dollars is something that really levels you up in an important way. Okay, tell me why I can't move the screen either. I can move the screen. Sorry, guys. This is my first Zoom presentation. All right. So for those who are not in federal grants or are not as familiar with federal grants, they appear to be things that they might not actually be. One of the things is that they're not charity and they're not philanthropy. They're not like other grant processes. You don't get the grant after you develop a relationship with an agency. I probably don't need to tell you this, but they're not written in English either. And although it sounds a little bit rude, they're not actually designed about helping people. They could help people, but that's not really the design. What grants are is a policy tool. Grants are one way that the US government solves societal problems. And one of the other great things about the pandemic, other than this is my project for the pandemic, is that you can really start to see from just current events how the government works to solve problems. You're seeing direct aid to people, you're seeing loans, loan forgiveness, incentives, deferrals. Government has a lot of tools to solve problems. If they decide to use a grant, it's really telling you how they see the problem. It's a large part based on how they define the problem. So to give you an example, if you see that the problem of poverty is that people don't have enough resources, Congress might be moved to provide a grant to provide for basic resources, for basic needs like food or shelter. But if you think that the best solution to poverty is a paycheck, you might not go after a grant at all. Congress might be incentivizing the private sector to hire. If the policy tool is a grant, they have decided that they need community partners to implement the societal solutions. Those partners are most often state and local governments, institutions of higher education, and nonprofit organizations. By law, grants are defined as a transfer of money that's given to the partner without substantial involvement by the federal government. I know for those people who have federal grants, it probably doesn't feel that way. But from the government's perspective, if they wanted substantial involvement, it wouldn't be a grant. It would be a cooperative agreement or another mechanism entirely. So what this means is that if the government has decided that they're issuing a grant, you are key to the process. They need your organization's expertise, connections, your location, your infrastructure. They're going to want some kind of match or leveraged resources, which doesn't necessarily mean money. So if a policy tool is a grant, the nonprofits are often key to this process. All federal grants are made with legislation and appropriation, which is in of itself legislation. They don't start with a big idea or a great solution. They actually start with bill drafting, which is a process of building a solution from legal precedent and current law. There are no unintentional words that go into a bill. When that bill is drafted, it then is introduced into either House of Congress or both houses of Congress, where it goes through a lengthy process of consensus building and compromise. So whatever that original thought was about the solution is modified by politics and need and negotiation. When that is made into law, it is sent over to the agency for which it is appropriate, where it goes through another process of rulemaking. The agency has to figure out, how are we going to implement this? Who's going to be in charge of overseeing this? How is this going to fit with our other programs? Rulemaking alone can take another 2 to 10 years to complete. At every point along the way, this process, you are given opportunities for public comment, and there is public oversight. My theory is that embedded in the process itself are tools that, if you understand and know where to look for, that can help you to win federal grants. A lot of people see this as challenges. I see them as keys. So although each agency has its own mission and culture and language and traditions, across all agencies, there are some common elements that I call limited contact in a competitive process in the public domain, resulting in a legal contract. So key one, limited contact. Federal agencies are actually required by law to be helpful, which I love, because if you think about it, doctors are required to do no harm. So program officers have a higher mission. But if they're not helpful, there is no recourse. There's no unhelpful hotline. There's no unhelpful police. So what is it that's helpful? What do you really want? What you really want is for someone to interpret for you how your organization or program or context is going to fit into their requirements and how you can possibly win. There are 3 scenarios that happen while the RFP is open. And by open, what I mean is from the time the RFP is published or released until it is due. For that period, 2 weeks, a month, 3 months, for whatever that period is, you are likely going to have little to no interpretation at all. You may never speak to a person. You may have an agency mailbox for the RFP. You may have a webinar that doesn't allow questions. You may be asked to submit questions that are shared in a written document to all parties. You may have some contact, which is where you may get a response back or have the opportunity to have a question answered. But in those cases, mostly what you're going to get is clarification of the RFP, not anything specific to your situation. Now, the Holy Grail is actually getting information back about your program or organization or contacts. There are some organizations that do that, notably the National Endowment for the Humanities, which will actually allow you to submit before you submit, to have a review by a program officer, and then have that returned to you in time to make corrections. But they only do that with some, and they only do that sometimes. So what's the impact of not having any contact? It's really hard for you to understand what's going on, and it makes it harder for you to win. At the same time, the people who do know what's going on, they have an advantage. What happens is that federal grants are really won by people who win federal grants. 85% of all federal grants go to the states, who often re-grant. Of the remaining 15%, half of that money goes to organizations that have won grants before. So before you get completely discouraged and think, oh my God, only 7%, understand too that the federal government, on average, issues $500 billion in grants every year. So even though we're talking about 7%, it's 7% of the largest grants marketplace on the planet. And that's in an average year. In a year like what we're looking at, you're probably going to see more than 500 billion released. So what are some strategies for dealing with limited contact? One is don't rely on the program officer during that application process. You can go before. If you start early, the program officer can talk to you and give you the kind of interpretive information that you're really looking for, as long as that RFP isn't live. The other thing is that you can join advocacy or replication networks that grow up around individual grants. Agencies that can't speak to you directly can fund centers of excellence, technical assistance centers, and other means of support that can give you mentors, sample narratives, toolbox reviews. They can really give you a lot of support that can make a difference. I was speaking to Mentor Connect, which is funded by NSF specifically to help people with their ATE grant, which is Advancing Technological Education, I believe. What the Mentor Connect representative told me is that if you go in without this network and try to win this grant by yourself off the street, you have a 30% win rate, or maybe a third win. Mentor Connect alumni tend to win 78% of the time. That is an enormous differential. And those services are free. So another thing to be looking at is the agency itself. What kind of problems can this agency solve, and in what way can it solve them? Government is very siloed. So agencies have very specific missions and lines that they can't cross. An example is at the National Science Foundation, while it can fund programs about science education, cannot fund programs about health or medical education. Those kinds of lines might not be so obvious if you don't know to look for them. So a really helpful tool that I like, grants.gov, beyond being a platform for filing grants, also provides information about how to win grants like this across all agencies. And they have something that you can Google this wording with, 26 federal grant making agencies, that'll show you these agencies that award federal grants, and for each connect you with their mission, vision, what major grants they award, and a list of everything that they've awarded before, as well as a contact at the agency. It's a really good way of checking to see whether what it is that you and your organization want to do might be a fit with this particular agency. The process also creates other tools that are helpful. Every agency is required to write a strategic plan every 5 years. The strategic plan lets you know what their priorities are and what their big picture vision is for what they want to accomplish. They're also required to report to Congress every year on their performance metrics and how they measure to their own strategic plan. I find these things enormously helpful in writing proposals, both for language that can go into the proposal and also for an idea of whether the things that I'm trying to accomplish are a fit and in what way with what the agency is trying to accomplish. The agency also will provide interpretive guidance, but like with so many things in government, when they talk about interpretation, it's the interpretation that they want to give, not necessarily the interpretation you want to get. But they're helpful because it helps you understand what they mean in implementation and practice for what they say. They usually have this information available on their websites. It's called different things. It could be a Dear Colleague letter. The Department of Labor calls it a TEGL. Please don't ask me what that means. I forget. They might call it rules. They might call it interpretive guidance. Most of the interpretive guidance that's going to be important to you is going to end up in the RFP, but it might be worth looking to make sure that you really understand where the agency is coming from. Other things that are built into the process that are super helpful for strategy is oversight. Sometimes agencies will pay for valuations across all grantees or across exemplar grantees. A lot of times that's made available publicly for free by the agency and also by the evaluators themselves. I've seen this on websites from Mathematica, MDRC, Metis. These are only a few of the people who have won contracts for these kinds of things. What I love about grant evaluations is that they break down the project design in the process of evaluating the project implementation. So especially if you're not familiar with how a project should be designed in order to win a grant award, This provides a lot of really helpful information. Once you have a grant, you're subject to oversight, not just by the agency, but also by Congress and also by the executive branch through the General Accounting Office, the Office of Management and Budget, and at each agency, the Inspector General. Anytime that there's a report published, you can get really valuable information on how this program operates. My favorite is GAO. If you Google GAO and you get on their website and you go to their search bar and you put in the program that you're applying for, the name of the grant, any report that's been published about that grant will come up right there, and it gives very useful insights. The Department of Education has the WhatWorks Clearinghouse, which gives you information about programs that have been proven effective. That's the one that's best known, but by this point, every agency has a list of model programs, evidence-based practices, best practices. If you want to look at models for successful implementation, these are also really great sources for you to check. So one of the things that I learned and used often when I was doing business proposals, which is available to you as well and should be used, is getting copies from the people who have won grants in the past. You can review a request, copies of awarded grants and awarded grant abstracts. You're less likely to get the budgets, but the narratives are available. If they're not posted on the website of the agency, and they are on some and they're not on others, you can do a Freedom of Information Law request. Every federal agency has a FOIL page on their website that'll give you instructions. And while back in the day, this used to cost money for copying, since now most of the information can be submitted electronically, usually you can get these for free. The one thing that I would say is that it takes a really long time. So if you really want to get meaningful information, start way in advance, 3 months, 6 months in advance of when you hope to have it. Agencies also keep those webinars up forever. So if you're interested in a particular grant, the agency webinar that explains that grant is going to still be up in all likelihood. Also, a lot of agencies have begun to create their own video series on how to win their own grants. And some of them are good. NIH, the National Institutes for Health, has a really extensive video collection that takes you step by step in how to win their grants. Super helpful. I also want to just make you aware of Supplemental RFP Information. So in a perfect world, all the information that you would need to respond for the RFP would be in the RFP. But a lot of agencies add a lot of really useful material in what they call supplemental material. This is also called by a bunch of different names. It could be called Supplemental RFP. It could be called application instructions. It could be guidelines. NSF calls it a PAPG, procedure and policy guidelines. If there's something referenced in your RFP or included in the package itself, do review it. Sometimes it really is just, how do you file? But a lot of times they tell you how to complete the forms, what they expect you to say, what they expect you to say in certain portions of the proposal. And if you don't know it, it could work against you. Absolutely the best way to get very specific interpretive information about your program and your specific proposal is to propose. If you lose, you will be able to get the reviewer's score sheets. If you do, they will spell out for you what they consider to be the strengths and weaknesses of your proposal and how many points were awarded or taken away. That information is very useful and can be used the next time you go to write a grant to improve your grant. For most people, federal grants are an iterative process. It takes more than one time to win a grant. NEH, National Endowment for the Humanities, actually did a study and found that among their grantees, it took 6 times before people finally won an award. The other thing that's helpful to note in this process is how the agency manages the process. So if you get your reviewer score sheets, for example, and you see that Of the 3 reviewers, 2 gave you a 90, but 1 gave you a 50. Not only does that tell you that one person was not caffeinated enough, it also tells you that the agency didn't step in to normalize the process. Either they didn't do training or they didn't do negotiation at the end. That's important for you to know. One of the things that I've noticed over time is that New York has a really unique environment. We have unique costs, and by that I mean high. We have unique populations, we have unique infrastructure, public transportation, housing needs. Reviewers come from organizations all over the country. You won't know who's going to be reviewing you and whether they're familiar with New York or whether they spent their entire life in Kansas or whether they live in Michigan. If you're seeing that an agency is not managing the process, you know that when you write your proposal, and this is good practice anyway, assume that nobody understands the New York context and that you need to put a little bit of explaining or comparison perhaps in what you write. We have a break here for questions. I'm going to take a pause and see if we have any or invite people to jump in and ask.
We don't currently have any in the chat box, but we did ask participants to jot down and please take yourself off mute if you've got a question for Judie at this time.
We do have a question in the chat. I missed the part where you mentioned Mentor Connect. Can you briefly repeat what you said about that?
Mentor Connect is a NSF-funded program to provide support specifically for the ATE grant, which is the Advancing Technological Education Grant. And what they do is they take you through a full year of mentoring, workshops, training, proposal review, and all. That results in a significantly higher win rate than people who don't use Mentor Connect. And what they told me was it's the difference between 30% win and nearly 80% win. So if you can do that, do that. Anything further?
Judie, you might address this later, so I'm just going to mention this here. We get this question a lot, especially from smaller nonprofit organizations. Do you have to have expertise in this area? Meaning, should nonprofits invest in hiring someone to write their federal grants? Again, if you're going to get to this later, we can hold on to it.
No, I'll answer that. As a grant pro and a former grant consultant, I can tell you that hiring a professional it definitely makes a difference if you're not experienced in this. However, it can be super expensive, so it kind of depends on where you're going. And however, even if you do hire a professional, it is very helpful for you to be informed about the process in the agency. No consultant is better than their client. So being really informed is very helpful to the process. The other thing is that the more that you know how to do yourself, the less you have to outsource. So maybe you can bring somebody in who can do the narrative, but then you have the ability to do the budget, and that saves you some time. Another option that I want to suggest that I've used successfully in the past is that you can write the proposal on your own and hire somebody to review it, either a grant writer who has a lot of experience winning grants, or I've also hired people who have retired from those government agencies and worked in those grants. And sometimes a reviewer, again, can make all the difference on whether or not you're responsive to an opportunity.
Hi, Judy, there's a couple more questions in the chat. I just do want to remind you it's 1:42, and I know that you have 3 more keys to get through. So I don't know if you want me to just save these questions and get back to them, or do you
take one and then I'll move.
Okay, so the next one, question was from Lucas, and he asked, he probably missed it, but can you get a hold, how do you get a hold of the information from the websites like grants.gov?
I don't know what information he's looking for. Are we talking about the information on how to learn about grants? They have a hashtag.
Previous versions, I believe, of a grant.
Oh, previous versions of a grant?
Yeah.
It will be posted on the agency, or you go to the agency's FOIL page, Freedom of Information Law page, and then there's a form that you fill out, and you have to request specifically for that grant what you're looking for. If we're talking about grants.gov in general, they're all over social media with the hashtag #LearnGrants, and that can connect you to some of their tools. If you're talking about the 26 federal grant making agencies, literally you can Google that phrase and get to that place. All right. Linda, did anybody else miss something in that key that we should clarify now?
I don't believe so. There's two more questions.
I think they're quick, so we could ask them.
Let's do it.
Okay. So Fiona asks, how do you identify the mentor connect type of services for federal agencies? Is there a source? Does one speak federal agency contact person, or is there an outside of the agency purview? And then Linda asks, another Linda, excellent name. If successful with one agency, should you be hopping to another agency for a different grant depending on the FP?
Yeah, you should go to a different agency. The broader that you are, the more you'll have to know. If you're new to this, focus on one agency. And how do you find these programs? The ones that are associated with grants. If you're going outside of the grant open period, the program officer should be able to tell you, or you should be able to Google. Actually, there's so much you can find by Google. So you can Google the name of the grant and network, or the name of the grant and technical support. Worst comes to worst, you should be able to get the program officer. So if we're good, let me move on. We're going to have another one of these questions tabs after each key. All right. Second key, you're in a competitive process. And as part of the competitive process and baked into the making of the grant itself is that the US government needs you to compete to ensure fairness and accountability with public funds. You're in a blind competition, which means you have no idea really who you're competing with. You don't know where they are. You don't know who they are. You don't know what their model is, what kind of institution it is. You're also competing on the government's terms, everything from when this is due and what has to be done to the actual contract terms. You don't really have an ability to negotiate. And unlike trying to do a kitchen renovation where you would be speaking to people and getting their low prices, these competitions are not really about price. So if they're not about price, what are you competing on? So the impact of being in this competitive process is that you really need to decide. I've been in a bunch of situations where organizations have met with elected officials or the staff of elected officials, or been at a meeting with an agency where somebody says to them, wow, you should really propose for this. I just want you to take that with a grain of salt, knowing that the process requires them to get as many people competing as possible. You need to make the go, no go decision. Don't rely on somebody telling you like it's a fix, because it may not be. You don't know how the competition is shaping up. So you don't know where you fit. And I mention that because there will come a time when you make a mistake. You're going to forget a deadline. You're going to forget to include a document. You're going to not fill out a form correctly. And if you read all the rules, they're going to say you make one mistake and you're out. I want you to remember that you're in a process and you're in a competition. So you may not know that every single entity applying for this particular grant was all on the West Coast and they need East Coast people, or that everybody was a college and they need community-based partners. You kind of don't know. So it's in your best interest to ask what the process for remedy is if you make a mistake. They may tell you no, but you're really not going to lose anything. And sometimes you actually may be able to remedy something because they need what you offer in the competition. You also have a better opportunity to negotiate after award. Now, the big frame, you can't. A legislation is legislation, but you might be able to have accommodations. They will not make those accommodations before. You cannot agree or disagree or argue or exempt any of those terms before, but you have a little ability to negotiate afterward. Also remember that there's public comment throughout the life of the grant, and you will find out about opportunities for public comment on agency websites if you sign up for alerts from agencies or if you join advocacy networks. You have the opportunity to provide insight and input based on your experience and operational ability, whether or not you're in on that grant. as a citizen you can, and you may want to. So the basic strategy for winning a grant is to get points. And I mean all the points, all the points. So make sure when you're reading the RFP that you really understand how it's scored and watch them, because sometimes they have all the questions that they want you to answer in the front of the RFP and how they expect to score that in the back of the RFP, and they don't always naturally connect. Make sure that you really understand how things are going to be scored. If they offer you priority points, my advice is to take them all, even if that means changing your program design a bit to fit. So if you're in a US Department of Education grant and they offer 5 priority points for a focus on STEM education or for computer science training, consider doing that. Because if you got every other point but didn't get the priority points, you might end up at 100 competing against somebody who got the priority points and is now at 105. 5 points could be enough to knock you out. So consider either adjusting so that you can maximize your priority points, or hiring a subcontractor who can help you to achieve those priority points. Also, if they offer points for new competitions, if you're new to the competition, go take those points. And know that in this field, new to the competition might also mean that you haven't gotten it in a couple of years. So if you've not won an award in 7 years, you might be new again. If you're new again, go look for those points. Don't assume that you can't get them. Formatting, which is the thing I think people most hate about federal grants, becomes enormously important because they have to find your points to give them to you. That means that you must use their format, and I mean literally, their numbering, their order, their language, everything, so that they know where to find it. If you've got a bunch of information that you want to tell them, do not tell them before you've answered their question thoroughly. Make sure that they can find exactly what they're looking for, because your reviewers are probably reading your proposal with a score sheet in hand and comparing notes. Make sure they can find it. The biggest complaint I hear from program officers is that people don't answer the question, which is really in part a problem of limited contact, but also it's a problem in terms of formatting. So if they give you a question, answer their question. If they give you a multi-part question, make sure that every part is answered. Even if you don't want to answer that question or you want to give them other information, make sure that you're answering that question. Also consider assigning pages by points. So if you know that the program design is 50% of all the points available, consider that maybe half of your proposal should be focused on program design. It doesn't have to be exact, but it should be around that. So one of the things that Sharmila had asked when we first started talking about doing this workshop is, how do you connect with national funding if you're a small organization or a new organization, or you're operating only in a single community? How can you win an award? And there's a couple of ways that I've done it in the past. The best way is having a unique constituency that increases and extends government reach and impact. Remember that they need you as a partner and they need your resources. The people that you serve are a resource. So you need to talk about your unique or non-traditional populations. As an example of unique, I once did a project that was focused on Chinatown. And Chinatown in New York has a largely Cantonese population. We were not serving the Cantonese population, but a subsection of Fujianese immigrants who were new to Chinatown. Fundable. Looking for populations by race, ethnicity, language, or condition. People who have experienced, disaster funding. You often find this. People who have experienced a particular disaster may be a unique population. Non-traditional, like training men for jobs in daycare or training women for jobs in construction, is something that's always of interest to the government. Sometimes it's easier to do an expansion of a national or an evidence-based model by providing a new population for that model. That might be as easy as geography, but it might be race, ethnicity, language, age. It could be a lot of different things. Another way is looking at coverage. If there's no other program in my district and there is need, maybe we can make the case for doing this. So access is not just people, though. It could also be like time. One of the things that I did was we won a grant for a daycare center to operate evening hours. And in operating evening hours, they were able to accommodate shift workers. That represented an extension of a model that was very attractive to the government. So it could be offering a service in a new language, access at different times, different kinds of access, like a mobile center instead of a facility, introducing new technology. Anything like that might be helpful in making a case. Where can you find what's been done before so then you can figure out what hasn't been done? So the government has moved in a big way to open data sources. The big one that they use is usaspending.gov, which lists awards to every entity under every grant, among other metrics. It's not my favorite though. I like each agency usually has its own awards database, or at least a list. I'd rather go directly to the agency. If they have the database, you're going to see what's won. They may have abstracts that'll give you a description of the project. Another way is to look at their lists or their press releases, which will give you a little synopsis of what was funded where and to what population. If you don't have it from the agency, you might be able to Google it and get it from the grantee or the grantee's social media. Those advocacy or replication networks may have it. You can use the Freedom of Information law to also get it. The key question for you to ask is, how is this important nationally? The federal government doesn't want to come into a local community and fund a local program. They want to know that you have somehow expanded the reach and impact of their program. As a partner to the process, you're going to be expected to leverage resources. Usually that's a problem. Usually you're thinking that that's money. And often it is. I'm not going to say no, but there are other things that you can bring to it that would be attractive. One of the things is the ability for the federal government to leverage non-federal funding. So if you've gotten like a large state grant and now you want to do a proposal to fund an extra cohort or to add a service on top of what was already funded by the state, that's super attractive to the federal government. You might be having not just constituencies, but relationships with institutions or organizations or networks that the government wouldn't be able to reach in any other way. You might have staff with particular expertise that's of value, especially if your expertise is acknowledged on a federal level. The Career Adolescent Pregnancy Program was something that came to mind for me. The other thing is that you might have physical plan that they want or need. So this comes up a lot in rural, which is not a thing in New York mostly, but if there's a service that the federal government wants to fund, but it does not want to invest in its own facility or its own workers to do it, and you have the ability to provide that, that might be very attractive to them. We're taking another pause. Do we have any other questions?
Judy, I was just taking a look at the time. We don't have any questions in the chat box. I was wondering if we try to get through the keys
Do it.
and then we'll pause at the end.
Right. All right.
Thank
So
you.
third key is in the public domain. Every part of this process is public. There is more information about the process, more free available information than you know what to do with. The last time I did a hit on this, I had an overwhelming amount of information. So that begs the question, what's important? How do I work smart and not spend my life reading information? The impact of public domain is that your competitors are watching everything you do. And one of the things that I see in the nonprofit world that I never saw when I was working in business is that in the nonprofit world, people like to explain themselves when they're asking their questions. In the process of doing that, they explain their competitive advantage, who they're serving, how they're serving. Remember that everybody else who's listening understands that, and they could do the same thing that you're doing, and maybe better, and then maybe you lose. So mostly I try not to do that. If you win award, you're going to be subject to oversight by the agency and by the agency's oversight agencies, but also the media. In this case, nobody actually starved, but the poor contractor did have a problem with a supplier that ended up on the front page. So not a great branding opportunity. Also not a really good opportunity to build that relationship with that program officer. I would just let you know that while you don't have to work on relationships at the beginning, in federal grants, it's what you know, not who you know. After award, you do have the opportunity to have a relationship with the program officer. Firstly, never surprise a program officer with bad news, but also get to know them because they're going to be sitting on information about how to win your next award or how to get supplemental funding that you would not even think of. Super great resource for you. In general, because this process is completely public, I want you to be strategic. Consider that maybe you don't share all the context around your proposal when you ask your questions. You have the opportunity to declare confidentiality around your budget and also around anything in your proposal that might be a trade secret, proprietary, or give you a competitive edge. You also can be subject to a FOIL, and if you declare confidentiality, that part of your proposal will not be released or will be redacted. Also, you have the opportunity, and I recommend this, to speak to program officers before an RFP is open. If you do, then they don't have to share that information with anyone. So what information matters? I haven't at all talked about registration with SAM or with grants.gov, but you'll need to do that. Beyond that, the whole package is what is most important. The RFP, the forms, the attachments, both the attachments that are in the package and the attachments that they want back in your package, and the supplemental information. That's really what you should be focusing on. The material that I talked about before, past RFPs, past awardees, evaluations, those are all great to give you more insight, but they shouldn't take away from the fact that you're responding to a specific RFP opportunity. I'll skip those questions and go into the fourth key, which is resulting in a legal contract. So if awarded, that proposal that you just wrote gets picked up and dropped into your contract completely, which means that your proposal becomes enforceable. The language of the RFP is your contract language. It's all based on law and precedent. There's little or no opportunity, as I said, to negotiate terms on the way in. What's the impact? You're going to be expected to deliver on that proposal as you wrote it. So your outputs, your outcomes, your activities, your constituencies, and the staff allocation of time, anything that you promised, you're going to be expected to deliver. You're going to be contractually obligated. Anything that earns you points specifically, you're going to be obligated to provide. And you will also be expected to work with the budget that you proposed. So some strategies for dealing with this is do not overpromise. In federal grant and proposal writing, you're better off talking about what you've done in the past than in making promises for the future in as much as you can. So for example, instead of saying that you're going to have 100% outreach or 100% enrollment, you can look back and say, you know, with 15 years of experience working with this exact population, we can tell you that we have had 98% success. That is a safer position. You cannot be held accountable for your past. It will not be enforced. The other thing is that the standard really is what is detailed, logical, and feasible. One of the advantages to looking at what other people did for awards or in the evaluation is to see sometimes it's not as big as you think it is. A lot of times an organization will say, well, to be impactful on the national level, I'm going to have to reach 200, 300 people. I've seen federal grants that reach 20 people a year. So don't overdo it if you don't have to. Also understand your operational impact. If you decide that you want to dedicate half of your executive director's time as a in-kind contribution, that's going to become a contract, and someone might be turning around looking for timesheets on that. If that's not what you can do, consider not promising it. Also, make sure before you submit that those insurance and those audits and those other things that they're going to require are going to be affordable to you. If they require you to give cash as your matching fund and you're pulling it from a grant, just be sure that that grant matches this grant term so that you're not left with like a year where you don't know where you're going to provide your match. If the RFP references the law, review it. Most RFPs will either give you the authorizing legislation or reference a specific legislation that authorizes it, especially if you're new to the agency. Definitely take a minute to review it and just make sure that there's going to be no surprises after award. The one thing I want to really bring your attention to in terms of legal obligations is the budget. If you write something in your narrative that's not included in your budget, you may be required to do it even though the cost is not accounted for. I've seen this come up time and again, so you should be aware of it. So if a proposal talks about providing field trips to students, but there's no bus or admissions costs in the budget, you might be forced to pull that from something else. A lot of things that I see talk about, and the RFP may even require you to do a specific assessment, and then there's no room in the budget for that assessment. If you're seeing that there are things in your narrative that don't match your budget, either take them out of the narrative or write conditional language around that in the narrative. So we will implement the CAT assessment or its equivalent, or we will provide field experiences, either live or virtual. Do some kind of, give yourself some wiggle room. The other thing is that the US government is the entity that collects payroll taxes. They like payroll. So if your proposal relies a lot on independent contractors, understand, and I have seen that they might come back after award and ask you to put those people on payroll. So just be aware. When it comes to the budget, the uniform guidance is the Bible. It's 2 CFR 200. You're going to get a resource sheet that'll provide you with a link to it. That will tell you everything that is allowable. Your standard in budgets is what is reasonable and allowable. And one note that if you offer matched or leveraged resources in the budget, it becomes part of your contract. If they don't make you put that match or leverage resource in the budget, don't do it. If there's any way for you not to do it, don't do it. Some grants ask you to write something in the budget narrative. That's a little different. Or you can mention it in the proposal narrative. But if you're providing income in your budget, they're going to be looking for that income. So just to give you an overview of how this framework works, you're going to be in an environment of limited contact where it benefits you to find interpretive guidance beyond the application period through documentation and through discussion with people who are in the process. It is a competitive process where you can compete based on unique constituencies and access, as long as you are of national importance. You're in the public domain, so you need to protect your competitive advantage and also work smart and focus on the information that matters. Finally, all of this results in a legal contract. So take a minute while you're doing it to be sure that you can deliver and afford what was promised. That's the presentation. Thank you guys so much. And I am here to answer any questions that might be popping up in the chat or that people want to ask directly.
Paul, did you want to ask your question live? And I know a few others as well had questions.
Sure. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah. Hi, Judy. Thanks so much for this. This was great. I was just curious, you mentioned the ability to declare confidentiality. As I've not ever seen that anywhere in any grant forms, how would you typically go about declaring something as being confidential? Is that specific to a specific funder you've worked with, or what would you suggest for a process there?
So that's something that's pretty standard on the business side that I see sometimes, but you have the ability to request it. You can just put in a paragraph that says that the financial aspects and pages 2 through 4 of this proposal are confidential. And ask the program officer how it would work in your particular grant. But it would be to protect you from having that information shared during FOIL specifically. And they should have a process for that.
Great, thanks.
Sure.
Other questions? So this came up a couple of times, Judy. I don't know. There were a couple of questions we emailed you. I didn't know if they were addressed separately,
Hi,
but
Linda
couple of-
speaking, I'm sorry. We just got a question. I think they want to remain anonymous, so I won't say who they are. They messaged and said, do you recommend contacting elected officials?
Not as much. I think that mattered a lot. The program officers really don't want to hear. It causes a problem from program officers who really kind of don't want to be faced with that pressure. Back in the day when I started, when the internet wasn't as fully developed, going to elected officials to find out what was available or to inquire as to why you didn't win a contract, I think was more accepted. Now there is so much information that's available for free, including as much information as you can want about where to find grants, that no, not so much. They don't even particularly want to read letters of support the way they did anymore. The one way that elected officials, congressional representatives, are still involved is that if you win an award, they'll often go to your senator or congressperson's office first and tell them so that they can make the announcement like they had something to do with it. So that's the big thing. No, I would use that really judiciously, honestly.
And we have another question from Arlene. She said, is there an average number of hours it takes to write a grant?
Yeah, I actually did some of these questions.
yeah, I was going to say that
Yeah.
I know that there were a couple of questions that came in, and that has come up a couple of times. So
Yeah. So can a brand new organization run by seasoned practitioner win federal grants? I mean, I've done it. So yeah, it can do. It kind of depends. So one of the things that I want you to know is that seasoned practitioner, if you mean somebody who works at the agency, has to be contractually tied to the agency. So it can't really be just a promise of this person's expertise. They would want a letter of intent or an actual person who's employed to be affiliated. You get scored on personnel, and the personnel experience matters, and they do read resumes, and those are really important. If that person's experience and past performance is part of how you win that grant, that person has to be in the grant in a concrete way. The other thing is, if you're a brand new organization, you're going to have to mitigate the agency's perception of risk. Usually they don't want brand new organizations. Usually they want you to have a couple of years of operating experience and a budget. So if you're a brand new organization, but you're an offshoot of an existing organization, or you were incubated by another organization, or you're part of a replication network, there may be an opportunity for you. But the big important thing, or if you come in with a budget of $1 million and there's a reason to believe that you're not going to fold overnight, but you're going to have to work this out. Start speaking with the program officer before the grant is released and see what the parameters are for that. So can for-profits and organizations operating without a 501c3 status apply for federal grants? It kind of depends on the grant. There actually is an eligibility status called 501c3, nonprofit without a 501c3. So in some grants, yes. And in some grants, for-profits can win. But consider that maybe those entities want to be a subcontractor, or consider that maybe those entities want to have a fiscal agent that can provide a 501c3. There's more than one way at it. If you've applied for a 501c3 and you're at the beginning of the process, don't apply for your, like some agencies will actually give you some time to get that cleared up, like a year. But if you can't guarantee that you're close to the end, I wouldn't do that. So short answer, yes. Consider partnerships and physical agents. How much time? So here's a question. What are your competitors doing? So I know for Department of Education TRIO grants or NSF grants in the ATE network, those people are starting 9 to 12 months in advance. They're writing a whole year in advance. So I'd say as much time as you can. In my experience, it's been like, 40 to 100 hours, but there's so much variability that it's hard to say. Have you done this grant before? Do you have existing copy? Are you very familiar with it, or do you need a lot of research? Do you have support? I find myself personally that there's 3 skill sets that are really important to this. One is budgeting, one is writing of the narrative in a responsive way, and the other is doing the administrative work like uploading grants.gov. If you've got somebody who's really skilled at budget, trying to write the narrative, add 1,000 hours. If you have somebody who's really skilled at narrative who has to first learn the platforms, add 1,000 hours. So, you'll have to work out a process that works for you, but it is time consuming. But I will also say this: if you were looking to get $1 million in any other way, you would invest time, and consider that perhaps you would invest time with this. And the better you get, by the way, the less time it takes. Does this work with state grants? Kind of. So 85% of the federal grant money goes to states. When that money goes, so does the guidance, so does the law, and so do the constraints. So a lot of the obligation comes along. You're still going to have the same restrictions, but they don't have the tools that the federal government has. So your ability to find out who else has been funded and all of that is not as well developed on the state level, probably not as well funded as it is on the federal level. The federal level really provides you with an opportunity to get information that's just not available on the state level. All right.
So, Judy, there's one more question we just got. It's, if your organization has not applied for federal grants before, is grant.gov the first place you would suggest looking?
Personally, I think that 26 federal agencies, federal grant making agencies, I would start there. So what I would do if I've never done this before is I would find your agency, look at your mission and your vision and your programs, and see if you can find an agency that looks like it's a fit. If it looks like it's a fit and there's no open opportunity right now, you do have the opportunity to speak to the program officer, and they will talk to you. These people are required by law to be helpful. God bless. So I would start with that. Also, if this agency has abstracts or past proposals on its website that are freely available, it gives you an opportunity to see, am I a fit? Is the stuff that I'm trying to do kind of in that zone? All right. Do we have anything else?
I think that's all I have, Linda. Do you have anything that came to you?
No, I don't have anything else. I will just ask for everyone to take the survey. We will be mailing it out, but it is in the chat. If you'd like to do that, we'd appreciate it. And if there are any other questions, you can contact Judy directly on any of her social media.
Which is available on the resource sheet that was dropped into the chat and is going to be emailed to you afterward. That has all of my contact information and social media. Remember, I have to get my Twitter account up. So if you would like or follow me, that would be so appreciated. And you may ask me a question on any social media and I will be happy to answer it. And I appreciate your audience here today. Thank you guys so much.
A few more announcements. Is this your last slide, Judy? Just remind me, I didn't want to cut you off. Okay.
Yes.
As we mentioned, the survey, you can also scan this code, which was dropped into the chat. As some of you know, SINFPA is starting, has been doing things a little bit differently through the pandemic. So your feedback, and I promise you it'll take less than 5 minutes. It'll not only provide feedback for SINFPA, but for Judie as well. As you note, she is, this was one of her first presentations in this style. So we want to make sure that we provide her some useful feedback as well. So the link is in the chat. The QR code is on the screen. Other resources that will come from today include the recording, the handout, and then of course on the screen and in the chat, Linda has put our social media handles and website and other ways to reach us. More than our website, we use our social media to update on the latest information, resources, and events. So please follow us on those, which again, we will include in a follow-up email. We have another session on fundraising coming up on March 3rd. The flyer was dropped also into the chat, and we'll include it in the follow-up email. But it's about how to maximize virtual fundraisers, and it will be hosted by Catherine Jones from the Collective Agency in partnership with the Association of Nonprofit Specialists. The link to join is also in the chat and on the screen here. I know that people are jumping off. This is in the survey, but if you want to leave us with one thing that you learned today that you'll take with you, please feel free to do that in the chat. And again, if anyone has any final questions or comments, feel free to take yourself off mute. We'll be here for a few minutes as we close.
Hello.
Hi.
Hi, my name is Sharonda Allen, and I have been writing grants, like little things through my school district. But now that I have my own nonprofit, I haven't won any grants yet. I wrote a few and I kind of got discouraged because I've never had to write on such a large scale. And I haven't had to do like the real like big budget narrative stuff. So I don't know, I know everybody charges so much money, but we don't have that kind of money yet because we just got started in 2019. I did receive my 501c3 in 2020. But I just wanted to know, like, how do I know that I'm saying the right thing? I know that, you know, my heart is into it, but I kind of feel like I'm not doing some of the traditional things that other organizations do. It's like they want me to do those same old things when I'm doing something different and new, that I'm like, just somebody just give me a chance to make this money, you know, so we can build it and then we can really show you what it looks like. So it's like, to me, I feel like I'm explaining it, but they need to know what it looks like in order to understand it. So it's like, I need the money to do what I need to do, but I can't do what I need to do because I don't have the money. So
Government is like not the place to do anything innovative. I mean, they talk they talk about innovative, but they mean innovative government-ish, right? Which means Lego building on the thing before. So if you're really out of the box on what you're doing, it is going to be hard to explain. It's going to be really hard to explain. So some of the things that I've been talking about, like finding what other people have done so you can find how you fit in, and going to find like an agency strategic plan. Maybe what you're doing is where they're going. Those are super helpful. Like school yourself in the agency that seems to be a best fit for you. And then outside of the RFP process, see if the program officer will speak to you. Probably will. Give you some really good feedback.
Okay, I'm just writing my notes.
Yeah, and what you're talking about is the exact hardest thing ever. And it's the hardest thing for small nonprofits, new nonprofits, and nonprofits that haven't won an award. Everybody else in this system is much more sophisticated than you. So you have to be sophisticated to win. And that's the hardest skill set to get. Absolutely.
Thank you. So I know I'm like, did I lose my touch? You know, but I guess it's not that. It's thank you for that answer, because it makes me feel a lot better knowing that you're right. There's not a lot of room for innovation, even if they want innovation. That's a very good point.
And remember, this is a process where you win by failing. So if an agency or an opportunity and you're writing those grants, be sure that you're asking for a debrief or evaluation score sheets. Find out why they told you no, and then see if that's what is something that's changeable for you.
Well, a few times they said, we're not going to give you money because we don't know if you can, you know, you have the capacity. Well, I need the money to show you that I have the capacity.
So that's the risk, right? The government is not about risk. So they need to know you can't ask for more than you already have in your budget. So if that's where you're at, maybe government isn't the first step, right? Maybe individual donors or a board are the first step, outside of my scope, of course, but.
Right. I have tried the State Farm neighborhood grant. I guess they had too many applicants or whatever. And there's a foundation that was looking at me, haven't heard back. And it's like, I have a lot of good stuff, but I'm like, maybe I just need to play the lottery, but then I won't need them. So it's, yeah, it's tricky.
Also government funding, right?
Right. Right. So that's my dilemma. And I'm glad that you understood, because it's like, I feel like I'm saying it's sort of complicated, but it's really not. It is what it is. They won't give me the money because I don't have the money.
Exactly.
But I can't get the money because they won't give me the money.
Exactly. But look for communities of color and racial equity grants, or grants that have that as a priority. I don't think there are that many now, but if luck, there might be some later, if they be talking about it.
But it's the same thing. And I'm not really like, oh, racial equity, just like that. But it creates racial equity. You know, these things that I do, it's like not the typical things that are being done, and they don't get it.
So then, yeah, so then maybe what you need is an individual who really can, advocate on your behalf, or start a board or something like that as a first step before. Once you have the money, of course, it's all easier. And yeah, there are barriers to entry here, huge barriers to entry.
Mm. All right, thank you.
Yeah, thanks for asking.
Thanks everyone for joining us. Thank you, Judie. I know people have been dropping off, but this was amazing. The feedback has been very positive. I know I learned a lot. Federal grants are really scary, really overwhelming process. I think you being real with us and these tips and tricks, if you will be immensely helpful. We look forward to your book. We look forward to following you on social media. For those of you still on, please take a look at her website and her Twitter feed, as Linda dropped in the chat. She's very welcoming to answering your questions via her sites. So don't hesitate to reach out to us or to her. And we look forward, Judie, to having you back. Absolutely.
Okay, absolutely. Okay. All right. You know where to find me. Thank you all.
Great.